we're going to struggle.
Opening my contacts book for the first time to reveal the secrets of what it really takes to be a murder detective.
Normally, if you don't do things properly in that time scale, or you miss something, you'll never retrieve it.
On the front line, exposing how we solve the most heinous of crimes.
To do that to a young lady, that just goes to show how people can be taken in by evil.
Welcome to Secrets of a Murder Detective.
The murder of Sinead Healy in October of 2000 was one of West London's most challenging cases. I'm meeting the senior investigating officer in the case to understand what really happened, the pressures, the setbacks, and the methods used in the investigation that brought the killer to justice.
My name is Jim Dickey. I was a Detective Chief Inspector attached to the murder team at Belgravia Police Station in the role of Senior Investigating Officer. Each murder case has its own challenges, but this one we were investigating right up to the door of the court.
Jim, thank you very much for coming in.
Nice to meet you,
Much appreciated.
Chief.
Yeah, lovely to meet you. Jim, the case we're going to talk about today is from October 2000. Police were made aware of a report of a missing person. When was it brought to your attention?
What happened was the CID at Hammersmith had looked at this because the mother of Sinead had reported her missing. She was 26 years of age. She lived on her own, was very close to her family, spoke to them daily, and she hadn't spoken to her mother or any of other members of the family for several days, and they thought it was suspicious.
She had a little circle of good friends. They had arranged to go for a meal on a particular night, and Sinead didn't turn up for the meal. Unusual. Sinead's word was her bond, you know. My name is Patricia Healy. I'm Sinead Healy's sister. Her friend contacted my mother to say, Sinead hasn't turned up. We're trying to contact her. No one's able to contact her. We feel there's something wrong. Then the police were called.
Hammersmith CID asked me to look at the missing person case to see whether I thought it was a missing person.
The initial investigation will be taken by uniform officers, and they will assess the risk around that person.
We'd only reach someone of your level if there was real concern for the safety and whereabouts of the missing person.
And because the mother hadn't spoken to her for 2 or 3 days, she and a friend got a cab to Sinead's address in Barron's Court, knocked on the door, no answer. And they said that was really unusual. On the face of it, Sinead wasn't a vulnerable person. She was over 18. She lived on her own. I wouldn't say there was any suspicions that, you know, she'd been abducted or anything like that. It's just, it was out of character.
What were your initial thoughts? What were your initial feelings?
Well, you go through a mental checklist. Is, you know, who last spoke to her? When was she last seen? Is her mobile phone switched on? Have you spoken to her on the phone? On the basis of what I'd been told, I sent a team down to a home address. Police had got access to the flat. They'd found her passport, a bank card, and her mobile phone in the flat.
When we go about our daily business, we leave a trail behind us, be it use of phones, financial records, we're moving around in our car, and the people we're in contact with. The police will be looking for any sign that the person is alive. It's called proof of life. They will be looking for any sign that says this person is still alive.
There was no activity at all on any of her credit or bank cards. She hadn't been to work, hadn't spoken to members of her family, completely out of character.
So essentially, Jim, what you're doing in your mind is it's almost like a checklist, and you're looking for proof of life.
Yes. At a very early stage, we ruled out that she'd gone to hospital, because that's one of the first things you do with a missing person. And she hadn't been taken into hospital. After a conversation with the family, they discovered that the bed linen and duvet was missing, and that her dressing gown was missing.
The year before, my mother had bought both of us and herself the same white towel and dressing gown for Christmas, and we all had the same ones. That was gone. Most unusual.
In your mind, are you starting to think that actually this could potentially lead on to be a murder inquiry, essentially?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I took steps very early on to treat it like a murder, although I didn't declare it a murder investigation initially. I made sure the forensics were done at her address. I directed that the flat was fully forensicated, because it's very, very important that within the golden hour, and the golden hour being the initial few hours of any murder investigation. Normally, if you don't do things properly in that timescale, or you miss something, you'll never retrieve it.
What did they find?
They found a blood smearing, fingerprint on the door frame.
If you've got a fingerprint in blood, that's quite a good bit of evidence, isn't it? Because
It is, yeah.
you're almost you can't normally time fingerprints, because a fingerprint could have been put there any time. But a fingerprint in blood suggests that that was made after someone's bled.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you knew,
Yeah.
having submitted it to Scotland Yard for them to check it
Yeah.
against the fingerprint database,
Yeah.
you're going to have to wait a little while for that result to come back.
Absolutely, and I drew the conclusion that someone had been assaulted or been subject of a violent attack. I needed a formal report from a blood splatter expert to say what their interpretation of those marks were and whose blood it was.
So if someone's been attacked, the blood will spatter out from that wound, or it might have come from a weapon. My name is Sarah Thurkle, and at the time of this incident, I was a crime scene manager and coordinator in Thames Valley Police. It might be either from someone's clothing or someone's hand, where that item's been covered in blood and it's been smeared along a wall. So there's quite a lot of interpretation that can be done around blood that's found at a crime scene.
Luminol is a substance that is used at crime scenes. When it comes into contact with blood, it gives off like a blue glow. So it will be able to indicate areas of blood staining that might not be visible to the naked eye.
Luminol, not used on every crime scene. It tends to get used if the crime scene manager feels that it looks like there's been a clean-up operation, that if the flat is covered in blood, you wouldn't use luminol, whereas if it looks like there might have been blood that's been mopped up and cleaned up, then luminol can be a really useful tool.
They were able to see that there was blood splattering on the skirting board and the lower wall.
Probably the worst thing you could find in terms of your worst fears are signs of blood, signs of some sort of assault, and you've got that.
Yeah.
How did that feel at that time?
I feared the worst, to be frank. You've got to go with the evidence. You know, we don't know whose blood it is. It could have been somebody else. We don't know whose fingerprint it was. Could be nothing to do with it. Could be a red herring. So you have to go with the evidence.
When CSIs attend a crime scene where they think there's a missing person, it's really important to be able to potentially take what we call ante-mortem samples. So take DNA samples away so that if a body turns up, then we potentially are able to identify that person from DNA. The most common items to be able to get a full DNA profile from is a razor or a toothbrush. You can then profile that toothbrush, get a full DNA profile, and then that DNA profile can sit and wait until such times as potentially, sadly, the person turns up deceased, and and then the DNA profile can be compared.
We put a flag on the police computer about missing persons, Sinead Healy, and that we had her DNA. We also did house to house in the block that she lived in, and Sinead lived in the top floor flat. And apparently the night she was last seen, they heard banging on the steps, like a heavy object being moved down the steps. And we were also told by the neighbours that her communal rubbish bin was missing from outside the front door, whereas everyone else's is there. So there's two other bits of what I call very good circumstantial evidence.
Your heart's going to sink. Every time these little bits come out, you've a blood fingerprint on the door, there's signs of blood on the wall. Now the neighbours are telling you they're hearing banging on the last night she's seen. All these things are coming together.
My interpretation of what I was told is that she'd been either abducted and taken forcibly out of her flat, alive or dead. I thought the worst, and I thought I was duty-bound to tell the family that, so I asked them to come to the police station.
Detective Chief Inspector Jim Dickey basically, in layman terms, explained things to us.
I've got to tell you, I said I fear the worst, but, you know, we're still looking for sign of life. I'll be the first person to be pleased and drop everything we're doing if Sinead walks through that front door. I said, but I've got to tell you, you must prepare for the worst case scenario.
His gut feeling was Sinead was dead. I looked Jim Dickey in the eye and said, nobody, I'm telling you here now, nobody would kill Sinead. Nobody would do that to her. Why would somebody want to kill Sinead?
We'll continue investigating and looking at opportunities, A, to find Sinead alive, or B, if she has been abducted and murdered, we'll try and find her body and we'll give you some closure. We will give you, if you like, some sense of what's happened, because at the time they were distraught.
Just shock. You fall apart. Absolutely fall. It's disbelief. This happens to other people. You get the newspaper in the morning and you read it. It doesn't happen to us. Disbelief. Shock. Horror.
The investigation into a murder where there is no body, where the victim can't be located, is extremely rare. In the vast majority of cases, police will have a body.
If you're investigating a murder, there's a saying, to understand how someone died, you have to understand how they lived. Today, it's often referred to as victimology. And that would have been a really important strand to your investigation, wouldn't it? What did you find out from looking into Sinead's life?
She was originally from Ireland, from County Tipperary, and very vivacious, fun-loving young girl. That's basically the profile, or the victimology, if you like, of who she was.
We grew up in Feathered, but Sinead was only a very young girl when we moved to England. That's one of us sitting on my mother's settee in Fulham. There's Sinead stuck in the middle and we're holding hands. What you give to be able to do that now? Full of life, full of energy, beautiful, very kind, soft-hearted. She worked hard. She was everything you would expect a young lady of her age to be.
She was a 26-year-old, close to her extended family. She worked as a minicab controller.
So there was nothing within her life, per se, that would suggest why she would disappear?
No.
And it was out of character?
Totally out of character.
In a murder investigation, detectives are going to get a lot of information from CCTV, which will need to be laid out in a way where it all makes sense. By placing events in chronological order,
they can suddenly start to make more sense.
She'd been seen the night before her disappearance in a pub with a friend of hers in Lily Road in Fulham, that they then walked back, which was covered by CCTV, the two of them together, and that they got a taxi to her home address, which was in Barons Court, West London. CID at Hammersmith identified the man as Kenny Lynch. For all intents and purposes after that, disappeared off the face of the earth.
Kenny Lynch came into Sinead's life when she was 16 years old. She applied for a job in a shop in Fulham Palace Road, and the interview was with Kenny Lynch. And she came out and she was happy and she said she got the job. That's how she got to know Kenny Lynch. And then over time they became friends. He was a very likeable guy, friendly, chatty. They were friends. I think they were going out together at some point. They were boyfriend, girlfriend.
He was a possible suspect because he was the last person to have seen her alive, so that we were aware of.
So you now need to know all you can about Kenny Lynch. What did you find out about him?
He had a bit of a criminal background. We also found out from doing lifestyle around Kenny Lynch that he was a serving prisoner at Aylesbury Prison in Buckinghamshire, and that he was on weekend release. So at the time he met Sinead in the pub and was seen on CTV, for all intents and purposes he was a serving prisoner, but was allowed away from the prison to come back home, and we knew he lived behind Fulham Palace Road, so very close to where they were last seen together. So we made a decision that he should be interviewed at the earliest opportunity so he could give his version of events.
What decision did you make around what he should have been arrested for?
He should be arrested as a suspect for murder, and the rationale behind that is all the circumstantial evidence around the flat. He was the last person seen alive. So we had all those facts. So we decided that we needed to interview Kenny Lynch to nail him to a story, and we did that. We arrested him.
He's in prison. It's not quite as simple as just rocking up at a prison and saying, you're nicked, you're coming with me.
Yeah.
There's certain processes you have to go through, aren't there?
You have to get a production order via the Home Office. They just produce the prisoner to a time and a place that you want, and they sent him down under escort with 2 prison officers.
So when you first interviewed Kenny Lynch, what you could put to him essentially was, you were last seen with Sinead.
Yeah.
We don't know where she now is.
He actually said in interview, I'm shocked, I didn't know she'd gone missing. Like, you know, big surprise. I'm concerned for her safety. He came across as quite confident, knew what he was saying, and he's saying, well, I didn't know she'd gone missing. He said he's a very good friend of hers. He often used to go to her flat. They were friends, she worked for him. Yes, they did have a relationship many years ago, but don't have any more. He gave an account. He said, yes, it's me in the CCTV. I was in Fulham Palace Road, Sinead, that night. He said, yes, it's me drinking with her in the Salisbury pub. He said, yes, he'd been dropped off by the minicab, went to her address for a cup of tea, and that she took a phone call, and because she was taking the phone call, he said goodnight and left because he had to go back to the prison the following morning and had an early start. So that's important because that is now good evidence. We can put him at the scene. So it's not just circumstantial now. We've got him admitting he's agreeing it's him. We've got it corroborated. So that's important evidence. That's in the bank.
Even when Jim Dickey made the suggestion, we said it couldn't be possible. He'd be more protection aid than hurt her. My father and mother, my father was saying, go away. Like it was just shock, you know.
We made some inquiries of the prison staff, and the prison officers that saw him back in, when he came back to the prison after that weekend away, when Sinead went missing, noted that he had wounds on his hands, which could have been consistent with what I call defence wounds. Now, they noted that on his record, so we had that evidence now as well. And as you can see, the circumstantial evidence is building up, but we still didn't have enough to make a case against Kenny Lynch because we didn't have a body. We didn't know she was dead.
So all these little bits are starting to build up a picture that the worst case scenario is almost the most likely scenario.
Absolutely. What we were doing in the background is gaining intelligence, and we had some phone work done around Sinead's mobile phone and Kenny Lynch's mobile phone.
Digital forensics form a huge part of a major crime investigation. Phones are especially important because not only are you potentially able to find out who someone's called or text or who they've had contact with, but you're also now able to locate mobile phones and where they've been, what masts have they pinged off. So you're potentially able to identify exact routes that a mobile phone has been taken. Back in 2001, they were more analog phones rather than digital phones.
What I got the phone analyst to do, I got him to look at Sinead's phone, and no surprises there. Sinead did take a phone call, as he had said in his interview, Lynch's interview, that she took a phone call, and he said he'd left the flat, when in fact we didn't think he did. But she took a phone call at roughly the time that he said, and after that phone call, the phone went dead. It was never used again.
Kenny Lynch's mobile phone was particularly difficult to track because it appeared to jump between different sides of the Thames River running through the centre of London, which to my mind suggests that it was probably pinging off different masts. Hence, that would potentially have given him quite a good alibi when he was arrested, because he could say, well, he wasn't in the location, and actually the police couldn't confirm or deny what location he was in because of the fact that his mobile phone was really difficult to track.
Also, interestingly, late that night, Lynch had turned off his phone, and his phone was off until he got back to the prison the next morning. And his then girlfriend had tried to ring him over 20 times. And we needed an explanation for that, why he'd turned the phone off and why his girlfriend was trying to contact him right through the night.
Back in 2001, if Kenny Lynch was to turn his phone off, which it appears that he did, then it's impossible to track where that phone has gone or where he's gone. Nowadays, with more modern technology, there's potential to still be able to track somebody.
Kenny Lynch is not a normal person. He ran a phone shop. He knows what mobile phones do and what they can't do. So he was aware of the technology around it, and we knew that.
And what evidence they could show.
Absolutely, yeah. It was quite frustrating. I told the family that we're exploring all opportunities, all options are open, and, you know, we just thank you for your support, and as soon as we have any news, I'll let you know.
It was almost a waiting game for you, wasn't
That's exactly what, and that's exactly what it became, a waiting game. And at one stage, we had a meeting in the office, and I said to them, you know what, Kenny Lynch could walk away from this. We're that close, but we're also that far away. I said, unless we get a body, we're going to struggle to put it together. I mean, we all suspected it was him. We had masses of circumstantial evidence, and he puts himself at the scene on the night, but we didn't even know she was dead.
The first person to be convicted using fingerprint evidence in the UK was in 1902. But even though they've been around this long, and we've now got the advent of further advances in forensic science, for instance DNA, fingerprints are still important. They're a central part to any murder investigation. And they have advantages over DNA. For instance, a person's fingerprint is unique to them, whereas DNA is different. For instance, twins, identical twins, all share the same DNA profile. Also, there are problems around DNA in terms of contamination. It can be very easy to move a piece of DNA evidence from one place to another. Fingerprints are different. If a fingerprint is on a surface, it means the owner of that fingerprint has touched that surface.
So the next step really was that the forensic reports of her flat started to come back to the incident room.
So you're bound to find quite a lot of fingerprint evidence and DNA evidence from the person that lives there. In this case, they were able to find a partial fingerprint that matched Sinead Healy's ex-boyfriend, Kenny.
One of the best pieces of evidence you're going to get at a crime scene is a fingerprint in blood. Yeah. You had a fingerprint in blood, but it wasn't enough of the finger to evidentially say it was Kenny Lynch.
Yeah.
But there was enough to say it was likely to be Kenny Lynch, but somebody couldn't go into court and say it was. Is that right?
Exactly, that's spot on, yeah.
Right. So the fact his fingerprint is in Sinead's blood indicates that he was there in that flat after Sinead had bled. What was your next decision around Kenny Lynch?
I thought it was time to re-interview him again and put the forensics to him to see if he had an explanation. We interviewed him on audio tape, as you did in those days, and he spoke to us, he answered questions, and he said, well, I'm not surprised my fingerprint is in her flat. I've been there loads of times. I used to go there quite often. I was there the night before she went missing. Yeah. So he said, I don't know what's happened to her. I haven't spoken to her. And he said, I'm really concerned. And also, the family said, well, we don't believe Kenny Lynch is a suspect. He's too good a friend.
As far as Kenny Lynch was concerned, he was a good friend to her. He was a nice guy, may I say. There was no reason not to believe he wasn't a nice guy. And what you see is what you get. No, it's definitely not possible.
We know that they've had a sexual relationship in the past, but that was over years ago, and they were good friends, and he'd often pop there for a cup of tea, or she'd go round to his house. Oh, he admits, yeah, it could be my fingerprint, but the blood bit, he said, well, I don't know how that got there. I've no idea where the blood is, but I didn't see any blood.
So you've moved on in terms of evidence in that the blood is Sinead's, but you've still not got Sinead's body. You don't know where she is. So you still can't yet go to the Crown Prosecution Service and ask for a charge of murder.
Still didn't have enough. We've exhausted most of our lines of inquiry. We still haven't got a body, so it's a waiting game. And at one stage, it was quite frustrating. I thought, you know what, Lynch could walk away from this. We haven't got enough to charge him. We don't even know that Sinead is dead. We don't know where she is. My gut feeling is she is dead.
In those quiet moments when you're with yourself, how were you feeling? How was Jim feeling?
Well, I talked it through with one of my DIs who was leading it, Neil Hibbard. We talked it through, and you know, we traded ideas, and between us we came to the conclusion that we couldn't do any more than we'd done. Once we found a body, then other opportunities, other lines of inquiry would present themselves, and we had to be patient and wait for that.
So did that moment come?
It did. On the 22nd of March the next year, 2001, Thames Valley get a phone call, a 999 call, from a dog walker.
Emergency service.
saying they found what they think are the remains of a body near a nearby, just outside Beaconsfield, off the A40. It was 6 months after Sinead went missing, so we've had a winter, and what made them realise it was a body, there was a hair clip with hair on it, and they saw bits of skeletal remains scattered about.
So you as an investigation team have put a marker on the police national
Yes.
computer, meaning that if a dead body was found that fitted your general description,
Yeah.
the white female age,
Yeah.
etc., that you would be notified.
It does look suspicious because people aren't buried in a shallow grave by the side of roads.
We called quite a number of specialists to the scene. The first ones being forensic archaeologists. When the body was finally excavated, it became clear that we were going to have to expand our search because there were missing bones, there were missing hands and feet, and the skull was also missing from the body.
A lot of her body was spread over the surrounding fields, and even some of the animals had taken parts of the body across the A40 to the other side of the road. So they were there for 3 weeks.
There was so little because she'd been ripped apart by foxes and all sorts of wildlife through the winter months as well.
They even called in animal experts, and this wildlife expert actually knew where the tracks of the foxes and the badgers would be, and they tracked it and they retrieved virtually the whole body, as you know, the skeletal remains, because the animals had eaten all the flesh.
Another expert that I called to this crime scene was a forensic entomologist. Entomology is the study of insects because this can be an indication of the time of death. Flies will lay eggs very quickly after death, and it could be a good post-mortem indicator as to how long someone's been dead for. The fly larvae go in several stages. The fly lays the eggs, and then you have the first instar stage, the second instar, and the third instar stage before the maggot then, or the larvae then pupates and becomes a fly. So recovering entomology samples from a body at all different stages, you don't always need flesh on a body to be able to determine the time since death. In this case, the entomologist thought that the body had been in that shallow grave for 6 months.
A crucial stage of any murder investigation is the post-mortem, and they will be conducted by a forensic pathologist. And they will be looking to establish a cause of death.
Pathologists said, because we retrieved her head, which was separate to the body, that looks to me that severe trauma blows to the head, and that's the cause of death. She's basically had her skull stoved in with a heavy blunt instrument.
She was absolutely unrecognisable, and it's something you would not want to put a family through, the traumatic sights of seeing their loved one just as the skeletal remains.
So you had the DNA profile already. You took a sample from the body, be it
Yes.
deep muscle tissue, whatever it
Yes.
is. The sample from the body was at the lab.
Yes.
DNA profile from her femur from the post-mortem stage and identify a DNA profile from that, and then we were able to compare it to the DNA that was found on the toothbrush that was recovered from her flat.
There's probably a misconception when people from the outside look at TV dramas, etc., that getting forensic results is a quick thing. It's not, is it? It takes some time.
It takes days, sometimes weeks. I think in this case it took about a week.
How did you hear that this was a match, that this was the body of Sinead?
The first we got told about it was a phone call into the incident room from the lab saying it's a match. Yeah.
You as a team,
Yeah.
you now know.
Oh yeah.
You've waited all this time.
Yes.
You've done all this work.
Yes.
You've just got this one line final piece
Yes.
to find Sinead.
Yeah.
And you've done it.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It feels great. It's great. It vindicated all our suspicions. Not that I ever want, you know, my suspicions to be true.
No.
Because you want the best for the family at the end of the day. But the reality is, my suspicions were correct.
It was horrendous, horrendous. Sinead's body had been thrown on the side of the A40.
To say that it was the missing bit in the jigsaw would be an understatement. It was the central piece of the jigsaw because it matched everything together.
In your heart of hearts, you knew.
Yeah.
And the best you can do now is to get answers for the family. You're never going to bring Sinead back, but you can give them their answers.
Getting the body released to her so that they could bring it back to Ireland and have a decent burial in her home village, which we did. And I even went to the funeral.
Jim Dickey came to the funeral along with a few more police officers. Jim Dickey approached the priest and he said, "We've done our job. We've brought Sinead home. Now it's your job to, you know, we hand her over now to you." You know, it's like they had such respect for Sinead. That just means so much. Excuse me, sorry. You know, when you see somebody who's done such wrong to her, thank God she was found, what was left of her. Yeah, they had great respect for her.
Being able to bury the body and getting justice for Sinead. Those are the two things you wanted to give to this family.
Yes.
The next step is to get him.
Yes. We had a bigger picture now. All the circumstantial evidence pointed towards Lynch. We had a cause of death, we had a body, therefore charge him with murder.
So you need to now rearrest Lynch with this new information, interview him and see what he's got to say for himself now.
The facts that we put to him were, we found Sinead's body, she's been murdered, cause of death is this, how do you drive to Aylesbury, what's your route? And he'd already told us it was the A40 and very close to Deborah's. And he made, for the first time ever, no comment to every question. No comment, no comment, no comment. So we knew we had him.
Completely changed his stance.
Completely changed his stance. You know, it was almost, he was glaring and saying, well, you prove it. And at the end of it, we charged him. We charged him with murder because CPS had already agreed, regardless of what he says, you've got enough evidence.
It must have been a really satisfying moment for you and the team.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said to the team, and I'd already said it, we were that close to losing it. But, you know, the opportunities almost opened up in front of it. It was like like the Red Sea opening up and the Moses driving his chariot through. That's what it felt like, you know.
When police investigate a murder, they don't actually have to prove somebody's motive when they go to court, but understanding why someone chose to take another person's life is important, none more so than for a jury. It makes it much easier to make that decision if you can understand why someone committed that murder.
One final bit, at the 11th hour, when we produced this to the court, one of his cellmates came forward and said he'd admitted to murdering Sinead because she went into one on the night that he'd gone back to her flat, saying she was going to tell his girlfriend that he was back having an affair with her. and he lost his temper and battered her to death. So that's the reality.
Well, that was the motive.
That was the motive, sexual. As it is in a lot of cases. The trial started on the 10th of June 2002. The family turned up every day. It lasted for about 6 weeks. He chose to go into the witness box and try to refute some of the evidence. He was very arrogant. He smiled quite a lot throughout his cross-examination.
Security was quite high in the Old Bailey. Kenny Lynch, he actually looked himself like a solicitor. You know, we were barely holding on to reality, but he had his act together. He was completely composed. He would smirk at us. Anybody he thought he could get eye contact with, he was smirking.
One of the court reporters at the Bailey who actually covered it, he said the prosecution, QC, had him on toast. It was clear that he was lying. It was clear that, you know, he was very arrogant, very full of himself. It was almost like, well, if I did it, prove it.
You've seen those games that he's playing,
Yeah.
the defence case being put. You're an experienced police officer, Jim. Even if your case is as strong as it could be, you know you can never take it for granted, can you?
We have to prove anything. He has to prove nothing. It's beyond reasonable doubt. There's no halfway house. You either prove it or you don't prove it, and he has to prove nothing. My hypothesis was that Sinead had been wrapped in a bedsheet and duvet, placed in the rubbish bin, and then taken down the stairs one step at a time, hence the banging, by Kenneth Lynch, who's quite a strong man. So he had access to a motor vehicle, which we knew he owned, that he took the body into the car and then drove it away.
He put her into the boot of his car, in the bin, and he dumped her on the side of the A40, naked, thrown away like an old pair of shoes. Yeah. Just had no respect for her. You wouldn't do it to an animal.
You've convinced the Crown Prosecution Service there's enough evidence against him for murder, but the next step is to convince 12 people at the Old Bailey,
Absolutely.
isn't it? What are you thinking, what you're feeling when you're sat there and the court usher asks the jury foreman or foreperson to read out the verdict?
Well, you have a bit of a, what I call a introspectful moment. You think, I don't really want to look at the jury. Hopefully they're going to say the right thing. On the 17th of July 2002, Kenneth Lynch was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Sinead Healy. When he was found guilty, he just turned to the jury, smiled at the family and went down the steps at the Old Bailey. And it wasn't a surprise to him, they got found guilty.
It's a miracle. If Sinead had any part in it, it must have been her willing us to find out what he done to her and where he dumped her. The only thing is, she couldn't tell us why. Sorry. Excuse me. Yeah.
It was clear that Sinead Healy had been put through a huge amount of trauma and a violent attack by her ex-boyfriend.
To do that to a young lady that you know for 10 years. Jesus, if it was a stranger, you'd say, he didn't know her. He didn't know her parents. That just goes to show how people can be taken in by evil. It compounds the effect, you know, that it has on my whole family, our whole family, not just me and my brother and my parents. The loss of Sinead cannot be described. You know, my daughter now, she never had the pleasure of knowing her only auntie. That's sad. Yeah, that's really sad. It breaks my heart, that part.
Your team had the absolute will not only to find Sinead, but to bring, if she had come to harm, a killer to justice.
And that's the least you can do. We're not God, we couldn't bring her back, but we can give the family some closure, and that's, I think, what we did. It was satisfying in a very humble way that you could see they valued that, and I'm glad they did. And I say thank you to my own team and to the family for supporting the investigation, because it was hard, it was complex, but we got there in the end.
Eventually what you did was you gave her dignity at the end of life, because there was nothing dignified about being in a shallow grave.
Absolutely not.
Being eaten by animals.
No, not at all.